Awesome. Hi, everyone. It's Aurelio Muraca, technology program coordinator here at the Danbury Library, but I'm not here at the Danbury Library. I'm somewhere else because we are having technical issues. So on this special night, we're actually going to be doing, from a undisclosed location, so to speak, via, Zoom. So thank you for joining us on this beautiful evening. This actually driving here back to my home, and I just live down the hill from Dr. Wagner. Kind of crazy, but I was actually filled with a sense of hope. So I think this will serve a great impetus for this evening's presentation by Dr. Wagner. So without further ado, Dr. Wagner, you have the con.
Okay. All right. Back to where I thought I was. I think my dog was advancing my slides. I think it's going to be one of those nights, but that's okay. All right. Yes, I do live in Bethel, and I'm up on the top of Hickok Avenue, and Aurelio is just a block or two away from me. So here is, as I always do, I start off with a picture of the science building, Western Connecticut State University. I'm closing the window because there's road noise. One of the joys is that I have a dog that's getting in my face. One of the joys is that our road is now a racetrack for ambulances and police cars and stuff. All right, I have that taken care of. So what I'm going to talk about today, I mean, if you come to some of my other talks, we do sometimes cover some pretty difficult topics that are emotionally fraught, danger for our grandkids and all that kind of stuff. And I think now and then it's good to talk about something a little lighter. And it's for those of you who like reading and are interested in science fiction, but not exclusively science fiction. There's lots of good writing out there from some really fantastic writers that are related to climate change in some fashion. There are artistic and philosophical ideas that are related to climate change or reaction to climate change. And then there's the question of whatever happened to the Jetsons. Back in the day, back when I was a young child, there was Saturday morning cartoons, and that was about it. Sometimes they would show some cartoons on at 4 o'clock or something about the time you're getting home from school. But some of my favorite ones when I was quite young were the Hanna-Barbera cartoons that had different faces and different voices and different and different premises, but they seemed to have the same kind of things going on. And it took me a long time before I figured that out. The Jetsons have long made me wonder why we don't have flying cars, other than the laws of physics, of course. I always wanted that George's fold-out briefcase. It turns into the flying car, but I never saw it. Related to this, do I have that? Let's see. Oh yeah. So some of the Jetsons and gizmos have turned into some, to reality. FaceTime and Zoom and things like that. We're doing that right now, and the characters in this cartoon did that sort of stuff. Teledoc, which was done to some degree during the pandemic, and Zoom meetings and online classes of various kinds and so on. Took me a long time before I realized that the Jetsons were just the Flintstones in a different setting. And it took me even more time to realize that both of them were just the honeymooners of Art Carney and Jackie Gleason fame from the 50s and so on. They are the same kind of characters, same kind of dopey dads and all that sort of stuff. But they were great entertainment for me as a child. Well, we need great entertainment because the world we live in is scary at times. There are more and more college students coming to attend college. I teach in Danbury at Western Connecticut State. And these students are coming with a certain degree of anxiety about a variety of things. You know, the usual things like how will I make a living and all that stuff, and does my boyfriend slash girlfriend really care for me and all that jazz. But also things like the world's ending. I had a student once, and others say almost the same thing, say that they didn't really understand why they were in college because the world was going to end. There's a certain emotional fraughtness that I deal with on a regular basis with students, and I'm happy to help them however they need to be helped as best as I can. Because going back to this previous one, this is last year's graph, but the last 7, 8, 9 years of climate, of weather, of temperature have been the warmest in Earth's history. I mean, in human history, not in Earth's history. There are plenty of times when the world was much warmer than it is now, but those were caused by long-term astronomical geophysical reasons, not due to one of the crazier life forms mucking up the planet. And and so, you know, and I often have to answer that question, you know, doesn't the world change temperature anyway? Well, yes, but it's on timescales of tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of years, and what we've been doing is all since the 1800s. Anyway, but it's not just heat. It's all sorts of stuff. There's the ice is melting. That's one that really hits me where I live. Not I live in Bethel, but I mean it's something that I take seriously. I was educated. My graduate work was at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and ice is a big deal up there, as you might guess, as is permafrost and related things. But climate change has caused very noticeable changes up there, and they are changes which will gradually accelerate the resulting change, positive feedback systems, all of which are not scary at all unless you know what they are, and I know what they are. And there's plenty of people are doing their best to make sure that we don't pay too closely attention to however it is that they get their money. And these days, of course, TikTok is one of those online platforms that people like to be concerned about. And so this cartoon from last year is addressing that. Something must be done about TikTok. Well, yeah, but we find ourselves in times where truth can be hard to sort out from all the noise. The signal to noise ratio seems lower than it was in the past. It may not be, but that's just the way we perceive it. And so much is seemingly ambiguous and uncertain, and we're anxious. So how do we find comfort? Well, one way that I find comfort and I find intellectual solace, if you will, is reading good books. And more, there are good books that are related to the fix we find ourselves in, dystopian literature of various kinds, including something called climate fiction. Sci-fi is the common term for it. But there's also utopian literature, literature that always has a happy ending. One of my favorite novelists, Kim Stanley Robinson, who's a science fiction novelist, has a habit of having happy endings for his books, which I really appreciate at times. But I also find a great deal of amusement and comfort in dark humor, and so we'll get some examples of that. Books that I've read that you might find interesting that are definitely timely. Climate fiction, aka cli-fi, is a literature that deals with climate change. Climate change is the context in which it happens. Generally speculative in nature, but inspired by climate science works may take place in the world as we know it in the near future, or in the fictional worlds experiencing climate change, or sometimes even in the past. Steampunk is an example of a type of literature which is nominally in the past, but where technology is based on steam and not on the electronics we found later. And it is as much as anything a sensibility as it is a genre, but I find it amusing. Dystopia is from the ancient Greek bad place, as a speculative community or a society that is undesirable or frightening. Our what am I trying to say? Our bad dreams coming alive. This is not new. Edgar Allan Poe, for instance, okay, wrote horror novels that were as creepy as any books around. A Telltale Heart is one of the ones that gives me the heebie-jeebies whenever I read it. But there's lots of different settings for these things, and there's lots of interesting things to read. One that it was just a few years back, maybe the movie is just a few years back, and the book was a decade or two, and it's Cormac McCarthy, The Road, and it's a post-apocalyptic movie where a man and his son are walking from somewhere in the northern part of North America to the Gulf Coast, hoping to find better conditions and food and things like that. And it's about their adventures. They don't ever say in the novel how the apocalypse occurred. It is sometimes assumed that by people reading the book, they talk about climate change. But the only problem I had with it is McCarthy describes a world where some humans are still alive, but virtually nothing else, which I find a little bit hard to swallow. But nonetheless, it's a damn good book, and it is as dark as books come. But it's definitely worth reading if you like that kind of stuff, which I do. Now, an old dystopian book, which you can pick up and read, and you'll swear it was written in the 50s, kind of the golden age of 1950s, the golden age of science fiction, but it was written in 1909. And the book is E.M. Forster's Machine Stops, or sometimes The Machine Stops. And it is about a world where everyone's hooked into on screens, and they live in their own cubicles, and they interact with each other only through electronics. 1909. It's prescient or something, and it's as readable now as it must have been back then. The story is set in a world where humanity lives underground and relies on a giant machine to provide its needs, predicted technology similar to instant message and the internet and Facebook and all sorts of stuff. Read it. It is definitely worth the read. You can find it online in PDF format. It's long past any kind of legal limitations. Definitely worth a read. A utopia is actually, it typically describes an imaginary community or society that possesses highly desirable or near perfect qualities for its members. The term was invented by Sir Thomas More in 1516, where the book describes the travels. It's really descriptive in nature. There's not much of a plot to it. Um, the travels of a traveler who comes upon a country that seems to have the characteristics which Thomas More thought were good in a country, and he named it the true place, Utopia. And the name is came from him, as far as I can figure out. It's not a word that existed before Thomas More invented it. And the Utopia is the country, a fictional island society in the New World somewhere. Definitely worth reading. It's it's old fashioned. It's 16th century English, but it's fascinating to see that someone was trying to imagine what the best place would be like. The engraving that is the opening page is this one, Utopiae Insulae Figura, and it's his description to an artist drawing the the peninsula of Utopia. Much more modern is my favorite science fiction novelist, Kim Stanley Robinson. He's an American from California, and I got hooked on Robinson with his Mars trilogy, Red Mars, Green Mars, and Blue Mars. It is a trilogy that follows the human colonization and terraforming of Mars, and it is phenomenal. It it cover I mean it follows the same characters, beginning with the first 100 colonists to come from many countries of the world and land and form a colony on Mars, and their adventures and their arguments and some of the scientists in this group want to keep Mars in its native state with no modifications, and others want it to become terraformed so that human life would be safer, because with a very thin atmosphere, anybody walking around outside, even if you're wearing spacesuits and all that, are being bombarded with radiation. And so the arguments between the Reds, those who want to keep Mars in its native state, and the Greens, the ones who want to terraform as fast as possible, is fascinating to me, and it's got evocative characters and so on. Definitely worth a read. I've read it 6 or 7 times, and I'll enjoy it every time. There's a couple of books that are follow-ons from that particular thing. One of which has a bunch of counterfactuals in it. It was the same scenario as the Mars trilogy, with some of the plot twists, twisting the other direction and things like that. This book is The Ministry for the Future, and this is Cli-Fi. This is Stanley Robinson. Stan is his name that he goes by, and he is writing about the effort to save the world from climate change. And it starts with a very grim climate event in India where the temperature goes up to above 35 degrees Celsius and the relative humidity up to 100%, which is a combination of conditions which are deadly to humans. And 20 million people in India died from this event in the story, and one American doctor survived, and it messed them up. And much of it takes place in Switzerland, and it's just an excellent book. And I suggest you pick it up if you're interested. And it does have a happy ending too, as does the Mars trilogy. Now, and there are lots of other books that are climate related, one of which that is definitely worth picking up is one called The American War. Omar, and I don't remember his last name, unfortunately, but the name of it's The American War. And it's a second Civil War type of arrangement where the North wanted to fix climate change and the South didn't. This is kind of the premise behind it. It's definitely worth a read too. And there's others coming out all the time, and they vary a lot in terms of tone and the scenario that they discuss and so on. So I'm sure the Danbury Library has copies of some of these, and maybe we can put together a reading list of good cli-fi for interested parties. I'd be happy to contribute my list to them. There's another. It's not really a literary style or a literary function thing at all, but it's more of an art thing, and it is a sensibility more than it is a style. It is a sunny, literally. It depicts a world where solar energy and wind and other renewable energies are driving the world civilization. And it is what the artist certainly hopes would sometime come along. Very optimistic. For instance, here's this one: a city that has various kinds of solar energy on these big parabolas, and I don't see any wind, but there probably is in this world one would expect to be. These are utopias based on renewable energy. There's one that focuses on wind. World as it should be, when the author seems to be thinking, and I would agree. Now, and some of them are, just beautiful. You can do a search for Solarpunk and you'll get zillions of these paintings by some very skilled illustrators. Now, one thing I realized after looking at a lot of Solarpunk art is that, especially if you look at the the cities, the Earth cities as portrayed in the more recent knockoff series of Star Trek, Picard, for instance, just shows San Francisco as the world or the interstellar or the interstellar headquarters of Starfleet, and it's very Solarpunk. It is utopian in nature and so on. I wouldn't want a steady diet of utopianism, but it is a relief at times to see something that's happy. Now, another similar sort of thing is Protopia. Protopia is one where people are free from such gridlocks and can work actively to improve their life. And it's a more carefully stated form of a dream of societal transformation. It doesn't say everything will be good for everyone, but it focuses on not on the state of things at a given moment, but the possibilities, shared capacity to move in mutually desirable directions. Simply stated, one could say the protopian society is one that has a capacity to become incrementally better as a result of the freedom of its members, a kind of a existential utopia of a sort. And I haven't read any of the novels that are protopian, but I found it an interesting thing. Now, I'm also fond of dark humor. My mother had, who was where I got it. My mother had a um, a book of sick jokes, and they're mostly silly things. You know, the kind of things that you would share with your 10-year-old kid. They weren't really awful, but I've kind of have a taste for dark humor. Um, One thing that could be called dark humor in some fashion was Walt Kelly's um, cartoon that he wrote for the first Earth Day. Now, Walt Kelly is famous for writing a pogo, a possum who lived in the bayou, Louisiana, with a bunch of other characters that are all Southern and spoke it and had their own view of things. And Pogo's take was, "Ah, Pogo, the beauty of the forest primeval gets me in the heart. It gets me in the feet, porcupine. It's hard walking on this stuff. Yes, son, we have met the enemy and he is us." That's where that phrase came from. We have met the enemy and he is us. Okay? As far as I know, that's where it came from. But there's lots of these on Facebook and other places that I've picked up, which I find darkly amusing. Someone asked me if I had plans for the fall. It took me a moment to realize it meant autumn, not the collapse of civilization. Vonnegut's one of my favorite writers, and he says this in a couple of different places in a couple of different ways. We'll go down in history as the first society that wouldn't save itself because it wasn't cost effective. Another place he says, we're going to go down. Civilization is going to crash because we're too damn cheap. Vonnegut. There's another cartoon that is a little twisted, which I read sometimes on Facebook. Bottom line, pay attention in this class and you won't be as easily fooled as your parents are. I hope I have two grandkids. One's a 6-year-old boy named Leon, and his little sister is Soraya, who's 3 months old. And I really hope they're not as easily fooled as their grandparents were. And there's lots of cartoons that darkly talk about the desire of some to make money to the expense of the environment. And this is one of them. Look, I won. Some of them are pointed in other ways. Climate change as a large wave getting ready to clobber and wipe out the different other kinds of disasters that we may be heading for: healthcare problems, immigration, guns, free school, justice, and legal weed. Climate change is everything change, as authors have said, and it's something that no matter what else we have to fix, we've got to have to fix climate change. Our extended forecast includes global warming and a catastrophic end to the human race, but for the weekend, it's looking like sunny skies, mild temperatures, and a general apathy toward climate environmental concerns. Back to you, Jen. Dark humor. Someday, this will all be yours. Oh, I've sent these to my father in Oklahoma. I'm not sure he appreciates them quite as much as I do. This is a good one. That's not, well, it's dark in some way. I remember growing up in Missouri, and we would have drills, disaster drills, where we would hide under our desks, and it wasn't described to us as a drill in case something we had to do in case there was nuclear war. Because even I, at that age of second grade, would have known that was ridiculous, hiding under a metal object that could be flown around. But where I grew up, this is what you did if there was a hurricane. A tornado watch in Missouri. Even that wouldn't have really helped too much because these metal desks would have been torpedoes. But anyway, it's just the abyss, dear. Try not to gaze into it. This one is funny because that could be that kid. Yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. Irony. Now, there's one other bit of climate fiction of the sort, science fiction certainly, perhaps likely the first bit of science fiction ever written, but it's also a climate change or climate story. And I have probably told this story here for the Danbury Library. I know I have for the Newtown Library, and it is part of lectures in my climate change course at WestCon. I teach 4 climate change courses, one of which is a general education course, which anyone can take without prerequisites. 2 of them are in the honors program, and those courses are interdisciplinary by stipulation, and one of them is primarily for biology majors who have taken my ecology course as prerequisite. There was a time back a few hundred years ago, which climatologists these days call the Little Ice Age. It really wasn't an ice age, it was just a cold time within the time between ice ages, the one that ended 20,000 years ago and the one which will occur some point in the future, presumably. And it was a time which was really cold, and it led to a bunch of historical events and historical trends that we notice today. Okay, the Little Ice Age. Little Ice Age, a period of cool and unsettled climate after the medieval warm period. There was a time called the medieval warm period, which was warmer than the long-term average. When a scientist says normal, they mean a long-term average. And if you look at the long-term average, the medieval warm period was warmer than that. And it led to changes in distribution of people in Western Europe in particular, and gave them the idea that the world was a more hospitable place, but when it was just a temporary hiccup, which then changed into the Little Ice Age, which was cooler than normal and caused problems. Okay. Little Ice Age then existed from the 16th century through the 19th century and overlapped with the Industrial Revolution. There were 3 particularly cool points. Now, the Little Ice Age and all the rest of those named climate periods are not found everywhere on Earth. The Little Ice Age was found primarily in Northwest Europe and Northeast North America. It wasn't found in Russia, for instance. Different factors caused the climate to be warmer there at that time, and with data which we can see. But during the Little Ice Age and during those areas where it did affect, and it did affect New England, which we'll get to in a minute, there were 3 times that were particularly cold: 1650, 1770, and 1850. There were 4 causes. One of them is that the sun does, in fact, change its intensity and change its level of activity for a certain amount of time. It'll be low for a while and send less energy heat to the earth, and it'll be hot in another while, and so on. And there was one time called the Maunder minimum, which was observed by a astronomer named Maunder. That's why he got the minimum named after him. And that's one of the causes. Another was there was a lot of volcanic activity. Volcanoes erupt, putting a lot of dust and stuff in the air, which blocks the sun and causes a cooling on the surface. These things are common. If it's one or two volcanoes at a time, it's no great big deal. If there's a whole bunch of them, then it is a big deal. If it's one of the so-called mega volcanoes or mega eruptions, then it's a real big deal. Another cause was the slowing of the circulation in the Atlantic. Thermohaline circulations driven by changes, the differences in temperature of the Atlantic and salinity of the Atlantic. And this was due to melting of the ice from parts of Greenland during the medieval warm period, which slowed that current. The same thing is happening now. The climate change is causing Greenland to melt, putting more fresh water cool fresh water into the North Atlantic, slowing the current. It's also due to the reforestation due to decreased human population from the Black Plague in the 14th century in Europe, and importantly, because of the loss of massive numbers of indigenous Americans due to the diseases they caught when first they came in contact with Europeans, smallpox and others like that. Big deal. Okay. If you have a large human population, they will need to farm a large area to feed themselves. If that area that was farmed, if those farmers decrease precipitously in number, they're going to farm less land, and the land which they abandoned, will grow back into forest, and the trees growing will pull CO2 out of the atmosphere, leading to a cooling, which is one of the stories behind the Little Ice Age. And so here's the Maunder minimum at 1650 to 1700, a particularly long, cool or a low activity time during the sun and solar activity. Now you can see each one of these scribbles is the temperature record at a different place in the world, and you can see that they're not all the same. There is a number of them that reach a warm time during the medieval warm period. There are others that hit cold during the Little Ice Age, but there's others, the light green, for instance, that doesn't seem to be affected greatly by either one of them. Okay, and I'm not sure where that particular data set is from, but it could be from Central Asia or someplace like that that did not had neither a medieval warm period nor a Little Ice Age, but we did. Now, one of the things that occurred during the Little Ice Age is that the Dutch fell in love with ice skating. Now, Netherlands is not the kind of place where there are a lot of frozen bodies of water during the winter for ice skating. Their ice, when the Dutch go ice skating, they'll often have to go inside because it's the water is soft. Well, during the Little Ice Age, it wasn't the case, and you can find paintings of the time. The Dutch were good at painting, or at least some of them were, showing people skating on canals and also playing hockey and maybe curling at that point. Although curling didn't come from the Netherlands. During the Little Ice Age, Britain was so cold that the Thames, that big river that flows through London, would freeze over. and they would have frost fairs on the Thames. Big fairs out on the ice. Here is a painting, contemporary painting of the frozen Thames in 1677. And everyone's out there playing around, including the dog. It was about this time also when the Scots invented curling, that game that either people love to watch on the Olympics or think is the most boring thing in the universe. It's like watching paint dry. I like it because I like the physics of it, watching the ricochets and the strategy of all of it. But it was invented as an outdoor sport in Scotland during the Little Ice Age. And here's people out sweeping, and there are the stones with their handles on them and so on. There's no doubt about what they're doing. Also, and this is a little bit more tenuous a connection, but I think it's probably reasonable. Native peoples in the Northeast found they were having a hard time with the cold weather. They were having crop failure, and so a number 5 of the tribes that were related and spoke related languages. We know them as the Iroquois or the Haudenosaunee in northern New York and southern Canada too. Got together and made a treaty that they would work together in order to avoid starvation from the crop failures. And the two statesmen who pushed this through were characters known as the Great Peacemaker. It's the only name we have for him, I think. And the other one is Hiawatha. Hiawatha was a historical figure. It wasn't just a poem by Longfellow. Okay? Hiawatha. And they together, along with lots of help, put together a constitution of a sort, an agreement called the Great Law of Peace. Now they didn't have a writing system, and so these things had to be put in people's memories. Benjamin Franklin was of the strong opinion that the U.S. Constitution was influenced by the Great Law of Peace, which the Haudenosaunee had put together a century before. Now, I don't know if that's accurate, if there was any connection or not, but Ben Franklin thought so, and he was a thoughtful, scientific-minded person. And so the 5 nations that came together were the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk, and now the Finger Lakes are named after them in New York. And later on, the Ticonderoga from the west joined as the 6th of the tribes. 1816 was where our real story comes up, and that's the year without summer. And this was a really cold year in Northeast North America and in Northwest Europe. Historian John D. Post said it was the last great subsistence crisis in the Western world, the last time when the Western world came close to starvation. And it was the low solar activity. It was a volcanic winter. There was a whole bunch of volcanoes in Indonesia and the Philippines and other places that erupted in short order, all of which put a bunch of dust in the air, which blocked the sun and made it cooler than it might have been otherwise. It had the greatest effect on northeastern United States, Canadian Maritimes, Newfoundland, northern Europe. Also known as Poverty Year, or 1800 and froze to death. There was crop failure in New England. There was ice freezing in the Susquehanna. There was ice floating in the Susquehanna during the summer, and it was a pretty brutal year. Late frost in May kills off crops. Large snowstorm in June in New England. so on. Volcanoes in the years prior include La Soufriere and St. Vincent in the Caribbean, Awu in Indonesia, Suwanosejima in Japan, and El Mayon, which I think is in Mexico. And then 1815, Mount Tambora erupted, and that was a big one, the largest eruption in recorded history. There were bigger ones in the past, but not for 70,000 years or something like that, and not during while humans had the ability to write down accounts. It was heard 2,000 kilometers away and killed 71,000 people in Indonesia, what is now Indonesia. So it is in the Lesser Sunda Islands to the east of Bali, to the west of Flores and Timor, and you can see the amount of ash to the northwest, which is where the prevailing winds pushed it. That left a really cold winter not only in North America, but in Western Europe. And there were some fairly well-to-do literary types in England who accepted the invitation of Byron, another literary type from England, to join him for the summer on Lake Geneva in Switzerland. And a rainy summer in 1816, Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, age 18, not yet married to Percy Shelley, although they had a child at that point, visited Lord Byron at a villa in Lake Geneva, Switzerland, and they decided to entertain each other by writing spooky stories. Mary, none of them are remembered except for one. Mary Shelley's great novel, Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, arguably the first science fiction novel in history, and still readable today. It is a brilliant novel about not monsters, but about what it means to be human. In Mary Shelley's telling, Frankenstein was not the monster, not the creature, but the scientist. And the creature in her book was quite articulate and quite bitter about his life. Read it if you haven't. And that is, I think I've used all my time anyway. That is the end of my talk. Can I answer any questions?
If you have any questions, please go ahead and put it in the chat.
Let me open up the chat so I can see if there's any. Comments. There it is. Well, I don't see any.
Okay, that's fine too. I mean, actually,
Oh, there's
any,
one.
you see that?
Any opinions on the Dyson sphere? Oh, the idea of a technologically savvy set of people who build, correct me if I got this right, who build a sphere around their sun so that they can harness 100% of all the solar radiation and use it for their civilization. Is that the one we're talking about?
Correct.
Oh, okay. Doesn't sound very practical in the near term.
No, I was just wondering, since we're talking about science fiction,
Yeah.
that definitely falls in the realm of fiction for now.
Yeah.
But from what I understand, there are different layers of civilization. Apparently, there's industrial, and then there's the I guess terrestrial. I'm not sure the exact wording, but that level is supposedly where we're at, where we can annihilate ourselves at any moment. First, the fast way, which has been the Cold War, and then, of course, now the slow way, which is to ignore climate change. And then, of course, if you somehow survive both possibilities, you go into the galactic phase where you go into faring civilizations, and then you have the fourth phase, which apparently where you can control your own weather. And that's kind of funky thinking that does seem to lend itself to science fiction, but apparently has been thought out by physicists.
There are a number of different scenarios that thinkers, novelists and scientists think about how the human civilization might end. I teach, among other things, I teach honors courses, and like I say, they're lovely because they're interdisciplinary by stipulation, and so I can talk about all sorts of weird stuff that a biologist generally doesn't talk about. And I have one of my lectures in the class, Life, the Universe, and Everything, that I'm teaching right now, that I'm just finishing up, is a lecture on the end, all the different scenarios by which humanity might end. And the students seem to enjoy, chuckling along with these. It's kind of one of those things you either laugh at or you cry.
Well, apparently, I guess astronomically, the better situation is that it won't happen for quite a while, where the sun burns off. And the hope is that our descendants, whatever they may be, are able to go to or find another, sustainable world, I suppose, or at least live in the ship that is allowing perpetual existence. Ultimately, that's what I guess might happen, and of course, the ultimate is that the universe that is inexplicably speeding toward expansion, which makes no sense to me, but apparently it's happening, has to eventually disperse enough that that gravity can't seem to function. So that's always a nice thing to think about in the far, far future.
Yeah, you get into temperature death. Yeah, there's all sorts of interesting scenarios.
But more recently, I think you agree that that despite the warming and cooling trends, including the summer without winter, those were more meteorologic things as opposed to climate change. And I think they always say weather's different than climate, but I think pretty much everyone thinks or knows or is agreement with that the rate of increase is concerning, and it's pretty hilarious that some Luddites are basically keeping a blind eye and ear, which makes it a little exasperating. I understand you can't submerge the GNP of all the nations into it, but you can certainly address it in some fashion, and they don't seem to be even open to that.
When I first started doing climate activism and climate education, I would occasionally come upon someone, and granted, this is Connecticut and not Texas, where I would have someone try to shot me down or argue with me. And when you talk to them, that's my wife coming in, and the dog going nuts. And when you talk to them, you find out that they are retired from the fossil fuel industry in some fashion.
Right.
And I understand no one wanting to think that their life's work is causing serious harm to their grandchildren. Now, I totally get that.
Right.
On the other hand, at some point, you sort of have to look in, you have to stare reality in the face. The other thing I think may be motivating some of these folks is the idea that, well, the fact that their retirement is tied up with the future price of stock prices of fossil fuels. And if demand for fossil fuels goes down, so does the value of their retirement.
Well,
I rarely get anybody argue with me anymore.
good. That's almost a good thing, I hope.
There's a few, but not many. And the ones that do are very careful to say, "Oh, I think the world is warming, but I think we'll always need fossil fuels."
Well, either that or they say that people are attributing it to human, intervention a lot more than they should. I don't know exactly about that.
The answer to that one is that the warming and coolings of the earth in the past, the ice ages and all that stuff, that occurred because of astronomical events and changes in the shape of the orbit around the Earth, around the sun, and so on, are all things that take hundreds of thousands of years to complete a cycle, to go
Right.
from one extreme to the other and back again.
Right.
Whereas, and that's the nature of ice ages and things like that. There have been plenty of those things in the past. What we're seeing, the heating that we've caused, and the effects that we are worried about now have all happened since the year 1800.
Yeah, I know. It's very unfortunate. I'll leave you with this because I know we're butting up against time. But people will say, "Well, how much can you do?" And I think most people will point to when the ozone layer was such a big deal in the 80s and 90s, and everyone said, how is that going to happen? That we get rid of all the CFCs? That we're really going to be able to do that?" And people got around to changing everything, and it worked because
Yeah.
we don't hear about that anymore. So it's possible, and it's not like there hasn't been a precedent that people are kind of whispering that at pies in the skies. It's
Yeah.
actually doable, and I still don't understand why people think it can't be done. Anyway, thank you very much for the lecture. Unfortunately, it seems like the apathy goes on given
Yeah.
the size of this audience. I hope the other ones, I missed the other ones, but I hope the other ones had a little bit bigger participation.
Well, this may also be because of the fact that they had a power failure or something going on in town that knocked some of them off. I do a lot of these. This is my 234th or 5th public talk on climate change. So I've seen everything from one person up to hundreds. So
Beautiful, beautiful. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you again, Dr. Wagener, for joining us in the series. And we hope to have you again next year for another series. But be sure to check out the calendar of events. We're going to have Dr. Wagener come in for the summer for our sustainable talks, which will be in person. So be sure to check that out. And also, if you have anything coming up on your end, Dr. Wagener.
I'll let you know.
Do you have a
Awesome.
website listing your event?
No, but I post them on Facebook. That's
Okay, beautiful.
and look for Mitch Wagener, and if you want to friend me, I'll friend you back, and then you'll know everything I know.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Awesome.
you're welcome.
And I hope, Mitch, if you compile for us a reading list, share it with us and tag Danbury Library. I'm sure we'll push that out to our social media folks.
I will. I'll have to put it together. I haven't really made a list per se, other than just the short list I have here.
But
And
please go ahead and do
I
so. I think a lot of people will be very interested with that.
I tried to scribble it down, but I was unsuccessful.
Oh well,
I'll be sure to I'll be sure to upload this video tomorrow. And also, if you look at our Danbury Library YouTube page, you'll see the past talks that Dr. Wagener has done for our Earth in Crisis series.
Thank you very much.
okay.
No problem. Thank you. And thank you for joining us. Go outside and enjoy some of this beautiful weather while it lasts.
All right. See you next time.
All right. See you next time.